Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Sonic Academy. Today we're going to be taking a look at multi-sampling again within Anna 2. Now P-LASK recently did an excellent walkthrough on how to set up multi-samples inside of Anna 2, so we're not going to repeat too much there. But I want to kind of step this up a level and just take a look at some creative processing chains that you can apply to your multi-samples when you are recording them or setting them up before going into Anna 2. Now admittedly, I used to do this as well when I first started sampling things. And a lot of people also shy away from samples because they think it's limited in the sense that it's not like a synth that you can control the sound. But there's a certain magic to samples, particularly when you are paying attention to the recording process or the processing of the multi-samples that you are using. It's the reason why instrument developers will go and record analog gear and then also run them through analog equipment to kind of bring out those tones and things that you normally wouldn't get by just using some sort of synthesized sound or a plugin. There's also a certain magic that comes with applying or baking in those processes into your WAV files as well, especially when you are sampling like what we're going to do here, where you perhaps only doing an octave or two, or like sample each octave, let's say doing on C1 or C2, C3 and so forth. There's a certain amount of pitch shifting that happens in the wave in between those as well. So particularly when you start applying sort of time-based stuff, you get some really interesting modulation happening within the actual sample itself, which is kind of hard to replicate sometimes outside of sample-based instruments. Lastly, we're also going to be jumping into Nuendo for this, or Cubase. It's pretty much the same thing, just a lot of extra stuff in Nuendo. I like using this for this kind of work. Obviously Ableton, like the multi-sample video that is available at Sonic Academy, is totally fine for this as well, but we're also great. There are ways to get around this kind of thing, but I'm going to show you a couple of powerful tools, especially when it comes to naming structures inside of Nuendo, that are great to have. Let's dive in. We're going to check this out. Right, so I'm going to, just for the sake of this video, be sampling a synth just internally rather than bringing in hardware and stuff. I'm just using a pad sound that I've quickly made from Diva. It really is super simple. Right, so what I've done here is I've set this up in Nuendo. I've got various different octaves sampled here. This is C1. We're not going to spend too much time on this because we have covered this, but specifically for this kind of DAW, and I guess most of this you could probably do in Reaper as well, or perhaps Logic. I'm not all that clued up with Logic, but Cubase has some nice features. Let's say, for instance, I want to stick to sort of camel case for the sample names. I can go ahead and remove those spaces there. And when I hit enter, I'm going to hold down the control key, and you'll see it'll actually update all of the parts within this section here. Now the other thing that we're going to do here is going to set up markers, so it becomes really easy for us to export multiple versions of our samples as well. How we do this is we can just at the top here create a new marker track channel as well. So we'll create a marker track. What you want to do now is basically highlight one of these sampled sections, and I've gone with time base of 10 seconds for each sample. We can hit P to set our loop points to this region here, and then just insert a cycle marker. And we're going to call this cycle marker under the description. We're going to give this a name of C1 because that is the note that we are doing. We're going to go here, do the same thing. We'll add an additional cycle marker. We're going to call this cycle marker C2, and this is important to know. It's going to save you a lot of time down the line when it comes to actually bringing these samples in, because Anna 2 will read these to make it to basically auto sample or auto set the root notes for these. And since we're going to be doing multiple passes on these as well, we want to have this naming structure in place. So let's do that again. We'll just add another cycle marker here. Once again, we're going to add C3, and let's go with last one, C4. We're doing pretty simple setup, only 4 samples per patch. Basically just each octave we're going to be doing one. Right, now that we've got that, we actually need this stuff in audio, so we could just do it straight from the MIDI notes here, but I'm going to put it into audio because that's how we would probably record these samples if we were recording hardware. I'm going to do Control-Shift-B, which is one of my shortcuts, but this will bring up the render selection settings, or the bounce in place settings. I want to just make sure that we've got the complete signal path in this case, and we're going to use block events for this. And that should do. We can just go ahead and render. And now we've got audio there. So now we can mute this. We don't need to bother with that for right now. And we can remove these channels too. Right, so now we've got our samples. What I want to be doing now is to set up a couple of different chains here. So we are going to be routing these to various different processing groups. We're going to make sure that this is done within these cycle markers as well. So let's go ahead and add a group track. And we will call this tape. And yeah. Let's duplicate that one again, and we'll call this one Lo-Fi Digital. And let's do one more. I think this last one we can do something experimental as well, just to see what happens. So let's just do crystal here. Okay. Now we want to make sure that we're routing this to our group so that we can actually basically do these bounces all at the same time in one go and have 3 different versions of each sample available to us. In some samplers, you'd actually be able to make those switchable, and you could actually switch sample sets via a key switch or something, which is handy to have as well. You won't be able to do that in ANA 2, but this is fine for our example that we're doing here. So let's go to tape. Now I want to set up a chain on this one, and we could do a number of different processing here. We could run it through some sort of saturation stuff as well. The tape will actually have some saturation in it. I'm actually going to go with tape Lo-Fi from Arturia, just simply because it does have some pretty pronounced flutter and wow effects in it. So let's just solo this part here and take a listen to the sample. So now we need to make sure that we're getting this this one to, I'm just going to recolor that, so we've got there. You can do direct routing to the channels from here as well, just using the direct outputs, but that's only going to let you send it to one place, and then you're going to have to be doing turning on and off effects for various different channels. So what I'm going to rather do is just send this via send channel here, and we're going to send this to group tape. We're also going to send it to group Lo-Fi, and we're going to send it to group crystals. Okay, so now we're sending the same signal to 3 different buses with 3 different kinds of processing on it. We can go here and just test our tape now and set this process up. And let's just write that one. Got a nice bit of grunginess happening on that now. This kind of modulation that we get here is going to be quite nice. So we've got a little bit of this kind of random wear and tear and pitching and stuff on all the samples. So let's just keep it simple. We'll stick to that one. What we're going to do on the Lo-Fi digital one is we're actually going to simulate something like a retro sampler, for example, like an EMU emulator. Something to that effect. Let's bring in the bit crusher. Actually, you know what? A better option here would be to just use, it's been a while since I've used the Steinberg plugins. Let's rather bring in Coldfire from Arturia as well. And just make this a little bit bigger for you guys to see. We'll go to the bit crusher here. We're going to set our frequency to around, let's go with 22 kilohertz, and we'll set the bit depth to around 12. Right, sorry, I just realized I had that sending direct. So we actually want to just turn these on here. I've also dropped the volume of the original tape channel here, and you also just want to make sure that these are now set to pre-fade rather than post-fader. So it's actually sending before this volume is down. Now we can solo that one. There'll be no volume on that channel. It'll be coming straight through to this one. There we go. So we've got our Lo-Fi sample now as well. It's maybe, the old samplers are around 22 kilohertz normally. I think the emulator, if you want it to be accurate, but I think maybe I kind of do it a little bit more aggressively there. We'll leave that one as it is. And let's, like I said, we'll do something that's a little bit more experimental here, and let's bring in something with like loads of pitch shifting, like crystallizer, for example. Well, sense like that. Okay, we'll turn down the recycling for that one. Obviously, you're going to get a tail here. I'm not too worried about that. We may actually even reverse the sample when we bring that in as well, to kind of create some slightly unique kind of flavors there. So we could also even bake in reverb. That also works. I mean, typically you would do reverb afterwards, but there is something about reverb being played back at slow speeds as well, which is quite special. So let's just mess around with this one. Just keep that at 12 instead. There we go. Just for the hell of it, let's maybe try that. That may be completely over the top, but let's just see what happens. Right, so now we have 3 different variants of our sample set that we can use. And now we're going to basically do this all in one go. We're going to bounce out all of these sample sets with each of these different variations with a single batch process or export function inside of Cubase or Nuendo. What we're going to do for this, we're going to set this up so it'll do all the naming structures for us correctly as well. We're just going to go to audio mix down. And I'm just going to save this to, we'll just choose a folder here. So I'm going to save this to my desktop, for example. We'll just make a new folder here called Sonic Samples. And we'll save the entire set over here. I'm going to be bouncing at 48 kilohertz, 24-bit, that's fine. Most importantly, what I want to do now is to set up the naming structure correctly. So how we're going to work this is we're going to go over to multiple channel selection here. We're going to be bouncing tape, Lofi, crystal variants. I'm going to turn off the stereo output because we don't need that. Most importantly, we're going to come down to the bottom here and we're going to select cycle markers. So we're going to want to be exporting individual cycle markers for each of these zones that we've set up for the sampler. And each of these have their naming structure in place. So what we can do now is we come over to the file name here. We're going to mirror what we have there, synthpad filtered, which is going to be the name of the sample, the patch sound that we're making here. Come down to this section of here, we set up the naming scheme. We're going to hit that little cog and we're going to take a look at this now. So we've got the name. You'll see we have synthpad filtered. Right here, I have cycle marker as an option. If you take that out, you'll see it'll change the. We can take that out and it'll change the files all to that. We could decide that we want the channel number there as well. You'll see it'll add that channel 6. What I would like to do here is to actually have the variant name. So we're going to have the channel name, which is going to be crystal. And then we're going to have the cycle marker description, which is going to be cycle marker name, which is going to give us the note value for that. Separators, we can use an underscore like this. You can have whatever you want. You can have dashes, you could have spaces if you want, but we'll just go with the underscore here. And click OK, and that is our naming scheme set up. This is what it's going to bounce out for us. And we are pretty much good to go. What we can also do, which might be useful, is to just normalize these. You can do those to max true peak or integrated loudness if you want. I sometimes do that externally in a wave editor as well, just to make sure that things are all 100%, but we'll leave that on here for now, just in case. Export queue, you can see everything is added to the queue now, and now you can just make sure that you've got exactly right what is going to be going out. We've got, since Michael's 12 files in total, and it's showing you all of the files that it's going to be exporting. You'll see C2, C3, C4, and a different variant of each of them. Now all you need to do is start the queue to export, and you're good to go. Alrighty, so that's all we needed to do. We've exported a whole bunch in a really quick period of time. You could do this, you could have these set up for 100 different samples if you wanted. As long as they're all routed through to the same processing chains, you can apply these chains to thousands of different samples in a sample set to be used inside of a sampler like Ana 2. So now this has been covered before, so we're going to run through this really, really quickly. We're just going to import, I'm probably not going to bother too much with the looping and stuff here, but we're just going to import some samples now so we can take a listen to the effects that we're getting from these inside of Ana. Let's go to Multisample Editor. We'll just actually initialize this patch. Multisample Edit. Now you'll see on the right-hand side here, I've got all the various different versions. Let's just grab the tape ones first. Drop them in. Yes, to root keys. And that's pretty much it. You see how quickly that is done now. It's automatically set up the root keys. What it's done in this case is it's mapped the C's in the middle. You could opt to do this slightly differently. So yeah, you've got the C1. What I do like to sometimes do, tones of samples change quite differently when you go up or down. So in this case, you could actually bring this one down to the root key C1. And then these ones you could actually just bring down to C sharp 1. So then in this case, we are now only mapping downwards. So with that little quick adjustment, we've now got the root sample at C3, and obviously the upper limit is C3, so everything else is going downwards. Right, so it didn't quite normalize these as loud as I would have liked. I should have just the gains a little bit higher, but we can just gain these up here as well. And let's take a look now. So now we've got our nice crusty tape sound that we have for this. And you can hear this sort of nice bits of like modulation happening all over the place as that sort of that wonkiness from the wow and flutter. We could have actually even gone a little bit more extreme with that perhaps. But that sample definitely has flavor now compared to what it did before. Obviously we can tweak things a little bit further as well with this. Let's actually see if we could load up the same one, but with slightly different mapping now for that. So I did actually save it with the mapping going down. What I'm actually going to do is just bring those back in again. Just as an experiment, quickly we'll drop this in. We'll say yes, we're going to import this again. And it's now going to auto-map the samples with C being in the middle. And we can just experiment with this now and perhaps just, let's go to the samples. We'll gain this up once again. And let's pan these hard right instead. Now we've got a really pronounced stereo effect just by changing the mapping. And of course you can start playing around with the actual synths components as well. We can obviously start adding in some filtering, additional filtering on top of what we had before. Change up the amp envelopes. You've got a lovely sort of warm retro vibe going on there. Let's dial in some reverb. I really like where that's going now. Now you may ask, why don't you just do this kind of thing internally? There's a difference. Like I said, there's some sort of magic that happens when you print the stuff to effects. So just each time you're playing a different note, it's not just a case of regenerating it. It's playing that same thing back at a slower speed. It's why instruments like the Mellotron and that kind of thing are so special. Yes, it's less versatile as a synth patch, but there's definite character that's ingrained in that sound now. Let's take a look at the other two quickly before finishing this up. I'll actually just create a new instance of Ana 2. We'll We'll start completely fresh here, and let's bring in the Lofi version that we had. Once again, we'll come to the MS editor here, and let's just drag in our Lofi versions. I'm not going to bother with the different mapping on this one this time around. There's still the tape ones. Here's the Lofi version. Let's remove this, and we'll just also bump up the gains once again. Beautiful old school digital vibes. Once again, we can play around with this further. Let's try and just increase the volume on that one slightly. Let's get out of this window and add in the J60 chorus. Add a little bit of that in, a little bit of reverb again. Once again, we can play around with the filters. Maybe EQ this one slightly to bring out some of that crunchiness on top. Once again, totally different character to before. Digital. Analog tape vibes. Right, one last one. Let's just check out what happens if we mess around with something a bit more experimental like we did with the crystallizer. Again, super simple because our naming structure is correct. We just go and drag our samples in. Click yes, there we go. Again, you can see how quickly it is to get this in once your naming is done correctly too. Remove that voice. Yeah, and listen to that. There's really cool little pitch things happening there now. We could, in this case, perhaps go in here, select all our files, and rather than have them play back standard like this, we could go to the samples, and we'll choose reverse in this case. So we'll have this sort of starting from the sort of max pitch section that we've got, but also those pitch delays are going to be playing in backwards now as well. Last thing, let's go and just dial in a bit of our amp envelope here. Whack the reverbs on again. Maybe this one as well. I might also, just because the filtering, I might bring out the EQ slightly a little bit there to just kind of accentuate some of the... Beautiful, lovely, lush flavors that you have there. So you can see you could do a ton of experimentation like this by adding different things. The sort of typical thing that you have is maybe going to run it through some sort of analog processing. One of the benefits with doing that sort of analog saturation as well is typically the effect that you have to do that with in a synth is at the sort of bus level. So you're effectively adding all these notes and oscillators together and sending one big signal through the saturation, which can cause it to sort of overload much quicker than what it normally would. In this case, bear in mind that we are sampling a single note and then adding saturation to it. So you can really kind of imprint that per note. So you don't have this kind of overload and breaking up of the sound as a whole. And you can kind of hear that with this tape effect here. There's a fair amount of saturation in there, but it's not driving it through a single bus and being saturated altogether. Each note is being saturated in its own way, and each one is different. Super nice and mellow tones that we have there. Right, so there you go. That's just some ideas that you could do when it comes to multi-sampling. It's kind of a forgotten art sometimes. You know, people get so caught up in just doing everything quick and easy inside of a synth these days because you have so much on hand. But there really is a lot of special stuff that you can stumble upon when you start messing around with sampled instruments like this. The world's your oyster. You really just go out and play around with this. Main thing is to get this set up right. Like once you have a template that you can work from with these kind of samples, you can bring in tons of stuff and just create huge amounts of variations to play around with in your samplers and inside of Anna 2. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I will catch you soon at Sonic Academy. Till then, take care. Cheers.